What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another video. On this video, I'm going to be reacting to an episode of the Veterinary Roundtable. This is a veterinary medicine-focused podcast. They tackle all things related to the industry, news, and issues within the industry and whatnot. But a recent episode caught my ear because in this video, they talked to a current veterinary student at the Ohio State University. Her name is Sarah, and she talks about all of her experiences with student loans. And they go through a lot of issues and topics related to veterinary student loan debt. And they talk about like how to prepare for it and what to do. And they talked about like a lot of issues just related to loans in general. So in typical social media fashion, I thought maybe I would insert my unwarranted opinion into this conversation. We're gonna go ahead and start the video here at the 1343 mark about. Yeah, we'll just kind of stop it along the way and talk about some things that I think about student loans now that I've paid mine off and that I've been a veterinarian for about 15 years now, kind of my perspective in case you want it. I know you didn't ask for it, but here we go.
So you were an undergraduate athlete. So then was your undergraduate school, did you have a scholarship then for your undergraduate degree?
I did not. I went to a Division III school, so no athletic scholarships. I was just fortunate enough to have parents who were willing to pay for my undergraduate degree. So I knew going into just like college in general, that I would have my undergraduate degree paid for. But if I wanted to go to advanced schooling, which I did, I knew I would have to pay for vet school.
Yeah, that bill was going to be yours.
Yes.
So fun fact, I went to Georgia Tech for undergrad, and I graduated from Georgia Tech in 2005. And my undergrad was mostly paid for because we had what's called the Hope Scholarship, which a politician named Zell Miller from the mid-90s passed the law for this, and they used the state lottery to basically pay for in-state tuition if you could keep a GPA above 3.0. So I went to Georgia Tech, which is a tremendous school, and I had very little debt. I took out a loan just to pay for my living expenses, but that was it. So I got basically a free education from an amazing technical school.
Like I knew that I had to take on debt. I don't think I knew the severity of it, right? Like, I don't think anybody really knows about the severity of it because it's not talked about a lot. And it's just like, oh, well, you're going to be a doctor. You can pay it off. Like, it's obviously a lot different than that. Yeah, basically nobody knows the severity of it because you're 17 or 18 years old when you start this loan bearing process. And you're, basically a kid still. I'm not trying to talk down to young people, but like you haven't even started with your adult life at all. And you're signing up for multiple six figures worth of debt. So like, how do you conceptualize what's even happening to you at that point? And a lot of times there's no option. There's no other path to get to this schooling and this education that you want to do in the first place. So that's, from what I can tell, a pretty universal story, which is like, you're just signing a dotted line and you have no idea what's even happening to you as you sign away your financial future. So no, I think the concept of it, I knew. I don't think the severity of it, I quite understood.
I think that's a great way of describing it.
Yes.
Because like, I think we're all aware of like, okay, we're taking a loan, but then like the severity of what it's going to do to you or how it changes, what things you have access to. Or...
Yeah. And everybody around you tells you just not to worry about it, not to think about it. So you don't. Like, that's literally what everybody told me going through this process.
Down to it, most veterinarians, if you ask them when they wanted to be a vet, it was when they were young. Most, not all. But so it's a dream, right? And it's like, how do you put a price tag on this dream that you've been wanting to fulfill and then you finally get in? It's like a lot. I mean, at least for me, I knew I was like, I did it. Like everything else will work itself out in my head.
So what this speaks to is the fact that what makes a good veterinarian in part is being really determined and not quitting on a goal, right? That sort of like real stick-to-itiveness. But that works against you financially because you will take out basically infinite loans because you aren't aware of the consequences of them. All you know is determination at a young age. And you'll take out infinite loans if needed to accomplish this goal that you will not quit until the goal is accomplished. But you're not able to kind of like think that far down the road about like, well, once I accomplish this goal, what does my life look like?
Did anybody ever talk to you about like at either of the institutions, the debt that you were going to incur or what that was going to look like? Or was there any kind of advising around that topic?
Yeah. I would say in my undergraduate institution, we had a pre-vet club that was 5 or 6 students. And, you know, an advisor for the club who was just interested in animals. Like we didn't have a super built up system. So during undergraduate, I didn't get a ton of information. Getting into vet school, I give OSU a lot of credit. I think first year, we had what they call, and we had this then every year after, but like right off the bat, we had they call it the Be Well Financial Summit, where essentially it was either one day of the week. It was like kind of like a 3-hour period that was built into our curriculum, required for us to go to, required that we actually like participate in it. Explaining everything, private loans, public loans, what your loan debt looks like, what your debt to income ratio means, what like your loan repayment options are. And then in addition to just like kind of that general talk that we had other like elective options to take on. So we could talk about home buying, or we could talk about like business owning and things of that nature. So OSU did a really good job of kind of laying the law of like, okay, assess how much debt you're going to be in. Here's the VIN student debt calculator, which I don't know if many people know about that because it was preached to us, but VIN, Veterinary Information Network, has like a student loan debt calculator that you can use. So amazing. You can essentially put in how much estimated loans you think you're going to have, how long you think you're going to repay it for, and all of those things like that. And it can essentially give you a better number. But yeah, OSU, I think, did a really good job of helping us understand. Awesome. It's terrifying.
I graduated from the University of Georgia in 2009. I don't recall any of these resources. If any of my former classmates are watching this, feel free to comment below. I don't remember anything available to us back then. Not that like UGA was unique in that regard. I think it just wasn't, you know, a thing we thought about back then.
A majority of the students here, like not all of our parents are paying for our schools. Most of us are taking out loans. Most of us are planning on either repaying or going into forgiveness. But yeah.
That's awesome that they did that.
Yeah, I was going to say that's amazing.
I'm glad that they
built into the curriculum
acknowledge
like
it.
that.
Would you say that the idea of debt affected your decision at all on where you attended, or were you pretty decided on Ohio State?
I think like the decision of Ohio State, once I stepped foot on campus.
Funny how the colleges will make themselves look pretty and give you that idea once you visit. It's almost like they know that.
Like in 2020, I submitted my application in 2020. All of the interviews were still over Zoom because of COVID. So most of the time you go to interview at a vet school and you like go to see the vet school. I didn't have that luxury. I applied to 7 schools total. One of them was out in Arizona because that's where my husband at the time was living. And it was Midwestern out in Arizona. That was actually the first school I had also heard back from, just because they did rolling admissions. So once you applied and did the interview, like if you applied early, did your interview early, you heard back soonest. So I heard back from them the soonest that I had actually gotten into school.
Does anybody think it's a coincidence that the for-profit school told you yes first? I'm not saying anything above that, but could it be related to their for-profitness?
I heard back from Ohio State. And seeing how much they charge for tuition because it's a private institution and because I would be out of state was actually a big deterrent of mine. Looking back, I got into Ohio State. I always knew I wanted to go to Ohio State. It probably wasn't going to affect my choices, but I remember at that time being in a mental pickle of I would love to move out here and live with my husband, but also I can't accrue that much debt because it was quite expensive.
Do you remember what it was?
At the time, the number I have, just this could be completely wrong, but the number that I remember is $73,000 a year.
Oh my God. $73,000 a year for tuition for, is it 3 or 4 years? Let's assume it's 3. So we're over $200K for 3 years of veterinary school.
But that was just for tuition. That wasn't for room and board and all that. Or I don't know if you live on campus. But.
Yeah.
So I tend to not factor in. So when I'm talking about student loans and taking on loan debt, I tend not to factor in room and board and cost of living loans because living and the costs associated with living are always happening in your life no matter what. So So I kind of removed that. I just kind of focus on the tuition side of things and like, what are you actually paying to go to the school? Because that's a direct, like, this is the product and we're selling it to you for this much. The cost of living stuff I kind of put to the side is what I like to do in my own head.
So I would essentially be paying for, like, obviously and usually they come up with some form of an estimate of like what your cost of living will be. But that's usually separate from tuition
right,
numbers.
Exactly.
So
That's what,
the round number that I remember is 73. I think the 73 was just tuition and like school fees.
I'm sure those school fees weren't marked up and predatory in any way, shape, or form.
But usually the housing cost that they put in is also like the lowest level of living that like most people can't achieve just because like housing is crazy. And
so I lived pretty low standard of living through vet school. I split a 2-bedroom, 2-bath with a classmate of mine, and combined the rent was $575 a month. So you can imagine how shitty this duplex was back in the day.
That's a lot of money.
Ultimately it didn't change my decision. And luckily, it being at Ohio State, I was granted in-state tuition. Ohio State's interesting in that you don't have to be a resident of Ohio to get years 2 through 4 in-state tuition.
Yeah, a lot of schools do this. They partner with states that don't have a vet school inside their state. So like at the University of Georgia, when I was there, we had a deal with South Carolina, Delaware, and West Virginia. And students from those states could get in-state tuition, and they set aside like a certain number of seats per class for kids from those states, and they didn't charge them out-of-state tuition. So really good deal.
Essentially, the way that they kind of like combat costs is they just charge more during your first year if you're out of state. And then after you're like done with that first year, years 2 through 4, we're all charged the same amount, whether you're from Ohio or not. So Ohio's kind of like on the cheaper end for most vet schools, probably because of that reason.
And I should say too, Ohio State is considered a tremendous vet school. It's like one of the best vet schools. I don't pay attention to like vet school rankings or anything that you can search online. I think a lot of that's just bullshit, bureaucratic type stuff. But I know from knowing people that went there and the quality of like veterinarians that went there and quality of research that comes out of the vet school there, that school is tremendous.
You had said in your bio that you are going to consider doing ER work. Was that choice driven out of the potential, like for earning potential and paying back loans? Was it mostly just your interest in that area of veterinary medicine?
Yeah, I think it's mostly my interest. Most of my experience thus far in veterinary medicine is small animal general practice. Kind of wanted to dip my toes in emergency medicine. I actually had applied to work at a specialty in emergency practice like the summer before my 3rd year, just to gain emergency experience, and they placed me in dermatology, which is so funny because
like
I like
wanted
emergency experience so badly. It was placed in dermatology. Hindsight, love the dermatology doctors and everybody that I worked with there, and I gained so much derm knowledge, which is like also so helpful for GP. So no matter where I end up, it was useful. But it's just so funny because I wanted to get that experience to know whether or not I liked emergency. Because again, like I felt like I needed more stimulation. I needed faster pace. I needed kind of like the hectic craziness of that walk-in clinic that I really enjoyed. And then I don't think it was really until I started exploring emergency options, looking into what that would look like. And obviously I'm seeing a price increase for emergency veterinarians.
Bingo.
They're in higher demand. They usually will make more because the services cost more.
Well, it's not just that. It's also the fact that you're working off hours and you're working without an appointment. So you're adding value simply by just being there, willing to see things at the drop of a hat that are brand new to you. And at like midnight.
Is part of my decision driven on that? Maybe subconsciously. And then I realized after going through my emergency rotation, actually like at OSU, going through my ICU rotation, like I really enjoy emergency, like triaging, stabilizing, figuring out what's going on. How can I best help this pet in this exact moment? I really like that aspect of emergency medicine.
That's awesome.
So from what I can tell, if you just remove like your specialty desire, like what you want to practice and your passion for like what discipline of medicine you want to practice, remove that for a second, just speaking numerically here and financially, the most cost effective way to like pay off your loans and like create a good financial future for yourself as a veterinarian, from what I can tell, is to be an emergency veterinarian and to get those skills up and running and get over your learning curve as fast as possible, because the demand for emergency vets is through the roof. It pays more, and you don't have to do a residency to be one. You can be a very good emergency doctor, and you can make very good money without having to go to all that extra stuff after school, like somebody like me had to be a board certified like specialist. I know I made a video about this last year where I was kind of like anonymously polling veterinarians about like how much they made, just to get a sense of what the current field is. And one of the veterinarians was an emergency doctor, and they listed $750,000 worth of income for 2024, which is amazing, right? And that person actually ended up DMing me and saying, hey, that was me. And the way this person did it was they basically just committed to working 22 ER shifts a month for an entire year so that this person and their partner could build a home together, like a custom house, and they didn't have to take any loans out on it. So they basically, probably had like $1 million a year income for that year. But that's just like the power of ER medicine. Like you can literally just, once you're a good ER doctor, you're not going to be this way right out of school. It's going to take a couple of years, but once you've reached your learning curve, you can decide to do things like that, where if you want to get weird with your schedule and work like all the time, even if it's for a brief period of time, like 1 year out of your life, if you earn $750,000 for a year, the amount that you can just set yourself up for the rest of your life is unbelievable. It's like the potential is just like as much as you want to work.
I'd like to say no, but I'm sure part of me in the back of my head is like, but I can also make more money. And in the end, like, yes, we're talked to about our different options in school about what our options are for paying back debt. And essentially the two big ones are either you pay it off or you look into possible public student loan forgiveness. I personally am a person that just like does not want to be in debt forever. I don't want to be in debt for the government for the next 25 plus years and then maybe hope for public student loan forgiveness and then like also pay a crap ton of money down the line because of this tax bomb. Like that just sounds very unappealing to me. And looking at essentially one of the other factors that they talk to us about is your debt to income ratio. So like evaluating how much debt I'm going to come out of school with, evaluating what my income is when I get out of school, and is it even feasible to do that? And I think if I find the right place, I find the right job, I know my worth, that like it is feasible to actually pay that back.
So we'll stop it right there real quick. So she mentioned two things that I think are really important that I always harp on with young people coming up in this field. One is if you have student loan debt, no matter how big it is, the best option for you, in my opinion, is to pay it off as soon as possible. There's a lot of people out there that will tell you to sign up for like public, forgiveness programs and things like that. And essentially that comes down to paying like the minimum on your debt. The problem with that is you're essentially counting on the fact that the government will pay off and absolve you of your debt in 20 to 25 years. And what I would propose to you is, what about our country and our politics at all points in the direction that is very likely to happen? That seems to me, from what I've seen with our politics, to be less and less likely as time goes on. So what happens if the government in 10 years decide, we can't do this anymore because we're going broke? And they decide that, we can't afford to do this, otherwise our country is going to go bankrupt. And you've been paying the minimum this whole time and your loan balance is the same. I think there's real risk there that nobody seems to really bring up with this situation. And what's even worse is that financial advisors will get paid to tell you to do these sorts of things. And I think that's only because they can't see a way out of this for your financial situation. So that's one thing. I always recommend just pay off your debt as aggressively as you possibly can and be done with it as soon as you possibly can. The other thing she mentioned here is the tax bomb. That's a very important concept where if you are forgiven of your student loans, the year that you're forgiven on your balance, that amount counts as your income for that year. So let's say you pay the minimum on a $300,000 student loan And in 20 years, the government, let's say they do it. The government decides, okay, you are forgiven of your debt. We forgive you of $200,000. Well, that counts as income. And if you pile that on top of your yearly income for that year, you're probably going to be in the highest tax bracket. So you're going to have to pay like 35% of that forgiven amount. So let's call it like $65,000 to $70,000. So even if you're forgiven that much that year, you have to pay a third of it just on the forgiven amount. So even if this does end up happening, it only is 2/3 of the benefit. So for those reasons, I don't recommend prolonging debt. Getting out of debt as soon as possible is the single best thing you can do for your financial future. I am 100% convinced of that.
There are some students, like, again, I had my undergraduate degree paid for. So like that's other debt that I don't accrue right now, which is amazing. But I have so many other classmates who like, they also paid for undergrad and they're going to be in $200 to $300 to plus $1,000 worth of debt. And then the majority of us are going to go into small animal general practice. And depending on where you work and depending on where you are, like your debt to income ratio just like is not going to suffice a way to pay back your loans. Unless you're the most like, and I'm not going to say never, right? People are going to find ways to do what works for them and everything. But it's scary to think about, and it's difficult for sure.
So I want to stop her right there again. One solution that I recommend to people, she mentioned going into general practice and how if you have so much debt, you simply don't make enough in general practice to pay off the debt. That may be true with like the general practice job that you have. But what I think you will have to do, which I did myself, even as a neurologist, I did this 4 years ago, right before COVID hit. You'll have to get a second job. And that second job, I think one of the more profitable second jobs is working vaccine clinics for companies like Petco and VIP. I used to do this on my days off when I was a neurologist, believe it or not. I don't know many other neurologists that would do something like this, by the way. But I would go and do vaccine clinics on my days off, and it was very easy work. I still felt like I was having a day off because I was just vaccinating puppies here and there. It wasn't that busy. I would hang out at a Petco, and these places pay like $1,000 for 3 1.5-hour shifts. Sometimes you don't do anything for an hour and a half during the day. And it's $10.99 income. You sign up on VIP or Petco and $1,000 for a day. That was back in 2019. I don't know what it is now. It's probably like $1,300 a day. But you do 1 or 2 of those a month, there's your student loan payment right there forever.
Do you make that decision where you just kind of grind it out for X amount of years and know that it's going to be hard, but you get that at the upfront? And in this scenario, what we're talking about, emergency medicine, do you come out? Because I think there was a listener question we had about a married couple coming out.
Yes,
with
they were both going to
dual
work in
debt.
ER.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, okay, knowing ER schedule wise isn't as flexible, or I don't know what words you want to use there. Cushy,
appealing,
I guess,
honestly.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Appealing. Yeah, that's a great word. Yeah. So, some people may look at, well, ER, like you said, is not my end goal, but
Might be
if
worth
that's
it
the
for
best
a
way
few
to get to the
years,
end
so,
goal.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you're really smart to not rely on the government to fix your problem. I mean, the only person that can fix your problem is you. And so, being disciplined and, staying after it, with that amount, I agree with you. When we were looking up the numbers for Ohio State, I think it's one of the more reasonable institutions, in terms of debt over 4 years. I think it might even be slightly lower than Purdue, or it's like right there around the same somewhere. But, the amount of money that, I just can't imagine carrying the debt until you're somebody my age, and then now you're going to retire, or it's going to get forgiven, and then you're going to pay taxes on what's forgiven. Like, I think people don't realize like all of that. And then you're hoping that the tax policy stays somewhat the same over 25.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, right. That's assuming that taxes don't go up during the next 20 years.
and so you're relying on somebody else to fix your problem. And it's not a wise way to live. So that's great. You're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you can, pay it off over 5 or 7 years, and be done with it, and then have freedom to use the money how you need to use your money, kind of a thing.
It's more, paying off student loan debt is more doable than I think a lot of people realize. I think a lot of people think that paying off student loan debt is not doable because all they think about is like the one job you do 4 days a week, and that's it. But you got to think outside the box. Like, what are my other options aside from a 40-hour work week during the day? And can I pick up extra shifts somewhere else and do something else or improve my skill set to allow me to earn more and do more? You've got to think outside the box to kind of take care of this a little bit.
I think your point about the debt to income ratio, like, we were talking about doctors and their debt to income ratio, and the differences between PAs and MDs and all this past little bit. And, in human medicine, it's the right direction. It's 2 to 1. And in veterinarians, it's 1 to 2. And so that's the problem, or whatever, is that they're lopsided. And so
human doctors can make so much money. It would terrify you. When human physicians cry about how much debt they have and how little they make, and especially when like human physician residents talk about how they're paid minimum wage if you factor in the hours that they work, drives me nuts, because a lot of those people leave out the fact conveniently that they're going to make over $500,000 a year for the rest of their life starting next year. This is a pet peeve of mine.
Being beholden to the dollar is not a comfortable way to live.
No,
Correct.
Like, from the standpoint of like feeling like that's what's going to drive your decision making, whether it be in the exam room, which can create anxiety and stress, all the way to, being at home, and feeling like that's all you're thinking about.
Yeah, what she's talking about is being in debt. And that's why I think that getting rid of your debt as soon as possible and paying your loans off aggressively is by far the best option, because the sooner you are done with that, the sooner you live a free, easier, simpler life. And that's the key here.
Yep. And so it's a really important topic. I'm glad that they spend time talking to you guys about it.
I know, that's huge. I don't think we ever had any discussions like that. Granted, I've been out 5.5 years, so I would hope maybe things have changed by now, but
I think the cost is just skyrocketed that it's ridiculous at this point. So, I mean, I think that they would probably be under quite a bit of scrutiny if they didn't seem to educate
right now for tuition.
We looked at, was it 170?
It was one, I think so.
170 something. Does that sound right,
4 years?
Sarah?
That sounds about right. I think. Go ahead.
It said, this says just Google. It said like residents, it's $159,000 for the 4 year, and then non-residents, it's $201,000.
Probably because of that first year,
roughly
the difference of the first year.
Is that number that you have just tuition cost?
Yes, that does not include books, room and board, miscellaneous.
Like, that's not bad. Like, tuition at, I think they're talking about Ohio State. If you get in-state tuition and it costs $150,000 for 4 years, and what that gets you in terms of like an earning capability the rest of your life, that is not a bad deal at all. And like I said, there's living expenses, but like you're always going to be living and incurring living expenses. So that's, that's always there. But that's really not that bad.
How have you dealt with the stress of knowing this debt throughout school, and how has it impacted you and the way you live?
Yeah. I was told by probably that financial advisor, like first year, also just by my parents, like, take out the absolute minimum amount that you can to borrow, because that's less that you have to pay back. I also have classmates who take out the absolute maximum that they can because they don't want to worry about money. They don't want to feel like they're worried about having to like wait until the end of the semester, absolutely have their bank account run bone dry before they get another loan refund. So I'm on one end of the spectrum where I do try and borrow the absolute least amount as possible. But then I run into areas like, it's December right now. It's coming up on Christmas. I haven't had a loan payment since August. Like, it's scary. And it's to the point where it's not lovely, but there's always there's ways to take out more money.
Yeah, it turns out there is an infinite supply of people willing to loan you money at 7% interest.
That feeling, it's that feeling at the end of every semester, as I'm sure you guys probably experience too. Like, when the loan runs out, there's not anything there. I think what I tell myself is just that, like, I can accrue as much debt as I'm going to, but I'm ultimately doing this because this is what I'm meant to do, truthfully. Like, I really want to do this. I think that this is my calling. I think that this is what I'm meant to do for my life. And no matter how much debt that I get, like, it'll get paid off I'll do the best that I can once I'm out of school to pay it off as soon as I can, because that's a personal goal of mine. But even if it doesn't get paid off as soon as I absolutely can, it'll get paid off eventually. Ultimately, like, I value my life and my happiness and all of those other things way more than I do the debt that I'm accruing. So I think just keeping the positive outlook of like, it'll be fine.
So I get that. And I definitely think that's important, but you have to be careful with that, because that mindset can lead you to just taking out, like she was talking about, people taking out maximum loans for their schooling. And that stuff adds up so fast. It's like a credit card that you don't have to even see for 4 years, that it can really, really impact your quality of life long term. So again, I feel that energy. Sarah seems like so much smarter and more grounded and well-spoken and just like present than I did in vet school, to be honest with you. She seems great, but, and I agree with her in large part, but I, just be careful thinking that way, because I think that leads to you just maybe, not paying attention to how much money you're borrowing.
Now, this may be a loaded question because you may not know, but is that like a shared sentiment between other classmates and friends that you have in school right now? Have you guys like talked? Do you share that conversation of debt, and how do they feel?
I personally, just based off of like a friend that I have, we have these conversations because like there are other projects in our classes that we've had early on in our curriculum where like we come up with budgets and we come up with this and this and that. And I just have heard them like talk about like, well, I'm not going to worry about the coffee that I buy myself every week, because like that coffee makes me happier than like not buying it for myself or something like that. Like getting yourself a sweet treat every week, like that's better for your mental health than it is not. So I think I've had a good support system in terms of like chatting with other people about it, and kind of gaining their perspective. I think that the shared stress is mutual for sure.
Yeah.
Anytime the topic of our loans come up, anytime that Be Well Summit came around every year, because we had it for our first 3 years through school, like you don't love to hear it. And every single time you go out of it, you feel a little bit more beat up because you're essentially just reminded about, everything else that's going on. But they're conversations that need to be had in the end.
How's that for a summit name? Be Well, and then everybody feels terrible after it. I want to choose a different name. I'm just kidding.
Do you feel like the school should be doing something different to change the cost of tuition to make it less expensive?
I think that's such a hard question to answer, honestly, because ideally, yeah. I mean, this is a public university. We should, in theory, be getting, federal funds, et cetera, things like that. And the fact that there's a price to our learning, and the fact that the price is so high, and that they know that we are not making equivalent amounts when we graduate. So I don't know if that's a more so of a problem of the schools charging so much versus our industry being underpaid.
So before they go any further, I don't think veterinarians are underpaid per se. I think it's pretty directly like correlated to what we produce, like how much work we do. Because like a lot of our contracts are just like you earn 20 to 25% of whatever you produce. Like there's a direct 1-to-1 relationship, or I guess 4-to-1 relationship there. I think the schools charge too much. Many schools do. Not Ohio State and those sort of in-state prices, but they get into these like private schools that charge you $300,000 to go there, and they don't even have a hospital for you to go to. They send you somewhere else to do your clinical year. I mean, it is criminal how much some of these schools pay, these for-profit schools.
Okay, so we want everybody to be paid more. So if we want everybody to be paid more, prices have to go up.
Yeah.
So if prices go up, then
we're at the same ratio.
Right. We get backlash.
Yeah.
Oh.
Jinx.
And so like it's this conundrum. It's this circular argument.
Exactly.
That you continue to see in the veterinary world.
See, Dr. King knows this because she's a practice owner and she's been a vet for a number of years. You can't just cry like, oh, pay me more, and have the money just come out of the ether from nowhere. You have to charge people more money for their pet care in order to pay a veterinarian more. So there's like a circular logic here that needs to be addressed, and she's addressing it.
And my husband drives him bananas because he's like, people need to, you can't have both things.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have higher wages and maintain the prices the way they are. And so it's just this, do you guys talk about those things as students and go, okay, like, yeah, how do I make all of this make sense?
I don't think we talk about it as, I feel like the main aspect that we talk about it as is kind of like evaluating individual, like where you want to end up. If you want to end up in this area doing this job, calculating what a revenue might be, back calculating what a salary might be. Based off of that, I feel like we don't talk about that full circle of that. However, we do talk about spectrum of care a lot here at Ohio State in terms of like what our main like GP clinic is literally called like the spectrum of care clinic, meaning that we are teaching in these learning veterinarians. Yes, being in a veterinary teaching institution, you can do A, B, C, D, E, F, and then still might not get any answers. And then you spent a whole lot of money and things are really expensive versus you can just try things and you can maybe not do every single ideal test, but like using your differentials and like pushing one towards the other. I think that we do a better job in terms of like trying to lower costs where costs need to be lowered.
Yeah, that's kind of something that you handle after vet school and after you've been a vet for a couple of years. That's kind of, I don't know if that's necessarily the job of a vet school to like handle that sort of discussion.
Well, and I think it's going to be interesting because there's 13 new veterinary schools.
12
or
yeah,
something like that.
Is that true? So this is filmed in December 2024. Are there 13 new veterinary schools either being like in process? That is insane.
AVMA just commissioned a study from Brake Consulting about there not truly being a shortage of veterinarians, that it's all kind of veterinarian, the graduation rate of veterinarians is meeting or exceeding the pet population owned households or whatever.
Yeah, side topic. I think that is actually a giant myth propagated by I don't know who, but there's this notion that there's this massive shortage of veterinarians out there. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not sure I even see that in just kind of seeing the landscape of everything. Maybe there is a little bit, but like calling this a massive shortage, I don't know where that narrative comes from, to be honest with you. I don't know what data really backs that up either.
So like, okay, we're going to have enough veterinarians, which is going to drive down because of cost. I mean, because of supply and demand. So now we're going to have salaries being driven down potentially because you're going to have more competition among who gets jobs and whatnot. And so it's going to be very interesting to see. And then you load the school debt on top. You know what I'm saying? So like now you load the school debt on top of it. And I'm thinking like these schools, like they have to do something. Something needs to change with the schools because
But like you made a great point, Sarah. It's like they know what the wages are coming out. Like there's no way these schools have no idea or have this like blind thought that we're coming out of school and making X amount of money and paying off debt, no problem. Like there's no way. They have to recognize that this is an issue.
Well, they definitely know. It's just that they don't care because what veterinarians earn after they go to school really isn't their problem. Their problem is how much do we charge incoming students who have seen themselves wanting to become a vet their entire life with this passion, this monetarily irrational passion, as I like to call it. All they care about is like, what will a student pay to come here? And then, oh, by the way, it's subsidized by third-party loan companies and the government. So they're going to pay whatever makes them money. It is not in their interest. I mean, I guess it really should. I mean, it doesn't have to be what a veterinarian makes after school. That doesn't dictate how much a school charges an incoming student.
That's where I think we just kind of want to bang our head against the walls. It's like, okay, if they know this, if we know this, where does it break? Yes. Like what's the reasoning behind going up to $73,000 a year for a school in Arizona?
It's just because they can. And because every year there's hundreds of people willing to pay that amount to try to get in.
Is it the argument that there's still X amount of people who want to apply to vet school, but there's only so many seats? Maybe. I don't know. Like they're not hurting to have people apply to vet school. I don't know. So they see it keep coming in. So they're like, all right, well, keep going up.
Keep going up.
No.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, they are business. I mean, they are interested in just making money.
Yes,
Yeah.
But
they
I
are.
think that it's a real problem.
I know.
It's going to continue to be a real problem. And they are saying, this is what you guys need to ask to be paid. This is what you need to ask to be paid. You're worth this much. You're worth this much.
I remember that
You're worth
conversation
this
in
much.
school.
You know? Well, you know, the owners of the clinics are like, I can't pay you that much.
Right.
Because, you know, we don't make that much money. You know, like you have to pay for yourself as a veterinarian.
Yes.
So you have to be able to generate money, and it has to stay within a certain percentage in order for everything else to work.
If you want like a placeholder number, if you're a vet student wondering about this, generally speaking, you need to produce or gross, as we say, 4 to 5 times what your annual salary is. So if you want to get paid, you know, $200,000 a year, you need to find a way to produce somewhere between $800,000 to $1 million a year worth of gross revenue for your practice. That's what it takes for a practice to be able to pay you that amount. They have to cover their margins, a certain amount, and you can't just go somewhere and make like, you know, if you're going to bring in $500,000 of top line gross revenue to your practice, you can't expect to earn $250,000 from that. You can't just make half of whatever you produce. Like the numbers just don't work that way.
I know you mentioned having a plan to address your debt. So if you don't mind speaking to it, I think our listeners might benefit from just getting some opinions. Do you mind sharing your plan?
Yeah. I don't have a full laid out plan. I'm more of a go with the flow type of person, at least when it comes in terms of finances. I think once I actually like secure a job and know what my job offer is going to be like, I can actually like put my money where my mouth is in terms of going down that road. But like a loose goal of mine is to have no debt 10 years out of school. So my goal is to pay it within 10. I'm part of this Facebook group, which has actually been very both encouraging and discouraging, called Debt-Free Veterinarians. I recommend if anybody is in vet school or newly out of vet school or just anybody in general, join Debt-Free Veterinarians.
I like that group. That's probably my favorite veterinary Facebook group. I post in there all the time.
Seeing people's stories of how they've paid their debt off within like 3 years. And then everybody's in the comments, oh my God, what did you do? People take inside jobs from just like buying properties and leasing them out, or like,
hey, that's what I did, but I wouldn't recommend it for everybody.
Like they'll give examples, but I think joining that group has really helped me mostly encourage. Obviously there's the cases in there that are, you know, the odd end of the group. But yeah, my goal is to not have any debt, at least student loan debt, hopefully no other debt. 10 years post-graduation.
I think that's very doable.
And another like caveat to that is I do want to have children. And I know that like having children is going to be expensive as well. So
yeah, it turns out it is. And it slows down your earning potential. I mean, not that I would trade having my children, but it's the reality of the situation.
I just think it's a good goal to have. It's realistic to have that goal, even if you have kids in your future too, because it still can be the same goal. You just find other tune ways how you adjust that payment then. So just depends.
Yep.
Different ways to do it.
Yeah. One thing she's kind of touching on there is the whole issue with like cost of living, people being able to like have kids and have a job and pay for their cost of living, and the how people, you know, it kind of segues into like, why are people not having kids as often anymore? Because everything's so expensive. Kind of touches on that a little bit.
What's your advice for those interested applying or attending vet school regarding the debt? Or in general, honestly.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Regarding debt, I would say if you know that this is the profession that you're meant to do, you're born to do, you absolutely are 100% committed. Don't let the debt scare you. Like obviously seeing that large number, knowing what salaries are going out of school, scary to think about. But it's ultimately like what you want to do with your life. Again, I prioritize the quality of my life so highly above, you know, the debt will get taken care of when it gets taken care of. Like, that's future me's problem. But I would say, first of all, don't let it discourage you. Second of all, I think having these conversations about debt in general. So if you're at a vet school that doesn't talk about it, I was fortunate to have obviously a program that did. Talk to somebody within your school to see like, hey, can we have somebody come talk to us about student loan debt and what my options are for repayment and like just like what it is in general. Because I feel like going into school, I really didn't know much. And honestly, having those sessions here at school helped tremendously. Just me understanding like what it even is and what my options are. Other just like vet school advice in general. I would say apply to as many schools are within your reason. Just applying to schools are expensive. We're talking about money right now. So let's talk about that. Applying to schools themselves are expensive.
Yeah, application fees are like hundreds of dollars. They might even be thousands of dollars by now. I mean, it is crazy how much money you're asking young people to pay just to apply to vet school. It's insanity.
I applied only to schools that I had the prereqs for and that I could afford.
That's key too. Like, don't just apply to all these private schools that'll charge you 80 grand a year to go to and be like, oh yeah, I'll go to that, and not think about like what that actually means. Try to focus in on it.
I truly believe that I was meant to go to Ohio State and that I was meant to be here, but I also believe that it's kind of like a flip of the coin, like almost like a lottery type of situation as to where you're going to get into, based off of the applicant pool at the time, based off of what your personal experiences are. Obviously grades play into it, but if you have a ton of experience and you're super interested in certain things and you know, just like are a good person, like the vet school can be a good place for you.
One opinion I've developed over the years is I don't know if like the decision of which school to go to, remove the finances from it. Okay. But as far as like deciding which school to go to, if you have options, I don't think it matters as much as people that may think it does. I think what matters is you, the individual person, and how much effort you put into learning this industry and this job and what it takes to be just a doctor, that kind of mindset. And then, you know, I think that's half the battle. And then half the battle is how you treat the learning curve once you're done with school and what you do. And I would say too, one of the most important things that I don't hear a lot of people talk about is identifying what you want to be after school and like what discipline of medicine you want to practice. Identifying that as soon as possible if you can, because then you'll know exactly what to do through vet school to kind of go towards that goal. Like with me, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I didn't know I wanted to be a neurologist until the very end, pretty much, once I got on clinical rotations. And I was kind of just like floating through different rotations, not knowing exactly what I wanted. So I think that hurt me more than anything. But that's the other thing I like to tell young people. All right, guys, there you have it. So I hope that was